Hi folks, this is Tim Garman, tutoring on Sit to Learn, NZDP101. This is an introduction to Photoshop, and today's date is the 4th of February 2021. Now I say that because I'm demonstrating this introduction to the Photoshop interface on the current version as of today. Other tutorials in the course won't be quite as up to date as this. You'll find that in your class there'll be many different versions of Photoshop that students are using, and also of course Adobe updates Photoshop regularly through the year, so it's quite difficult to keep all the tutorials up to date and current. So just a word on that: if you find that your version doesn't match the tutorial exactly, and there's something that confuses you, do get onto me by email as quickly as possible in the week, and I can just talk you through any differences you might have in your version and perhaps where things are. So we're going to look at the interface. I'm using version 22.1.1 of Photoshop. So Photoshop looks like a big program, but don't be intimidated by that. There are a number of menus that are repeated in more than one place. It makes it look bigger than it actually is. So across the top we've got menus with various things going on in them. Down the side we've got, on the left side, we've got your tools, and that little arrow at the top, if you prefer it to be single banked, I prefer it to be double banked. Just seems to make the icon slightly larger. You can change that to how you want. We've got the option strip at the top here, top of the window, and the contents of that option strip changes depending on what tool you choose. On the right hand side we've got palettes, and if we click on these layers, for instance, you can see they open up with some other tabs and options in there too. Click it again and they will disappear. Now just a word on the palettes that appear there. If we look at the window menu at the top of the screen, if you're looking for a palette and it doesn't appear to be here, it's probably because it's not open. So for instance, if we wanted to open the patterns palette, which is not open yet, there we see it appear. So anything that's not on the right there, just look under Windows and you will find it. To open an image, usually what I do is go to File and Open, or the keyboard shortcut. Now I'm using a Mac here, and the keyboard shortcut is Command O, or you can just go to the menu. For PCs, pretty much where we have Command, you'll be going to Alt, I believe. Alt or Control are the two PC keyboard shortcuts you might need. So let's just go to Open, and I'm going to open up the calibration image. Now, I'm not going to go into calibration on this video because we would just be covering too much, but just a comment to say that you should be able to make out the difference between 0 and 5% in the greys here, and at the other end 95 to 100%. On my screen there, pretty much there's not much difference. Don't worry too much if you can't see the difference between those 5% changes. It's a bit more of a concern if you can't see the difference between 0 and 15% though, and 100 and 85. Now we've got looking at the tools again. So we've got they open up with these little sort of guides on how to use them. This is the mover tool. So the mover tool at the top left will move things around for you. If you want to undo that on a Mac, undo is Command Z as a keyboard shortcut, or Option Z on a PC. So let's just do that. We've then got, and also I should say that, so if you hold the mouse button down, where there's a little triangle in the bottom corner, there will be other tools available. So, and some of them quite a lot. We've got the artboard tool. I'm not going to go through every single tool because some of them, as photographers, you're probably not going to use very much. Over here we've got the rectangular marquee tool. Now that's a means of selecting an area, so I can select an area in that way, and if I then went to the mover tool, that's what would happen. So that's a way of selecting things, just drawing a rectangular marquee over an area. And so you've got some different shapes. You can do the same thing with a circle, and it's worth saying that if you just draw it like that, you'll get an ellipse. If you use the Shift key, that's when you actually get a circle, because it constrains the proportions. And that is the same with the marquee tool. Without the Shift key, rectangle; with the Shift key, the square. So it's constraining the sides. One other thing to point out, once I've drawn that, if I then want to deselect it, you have got under the select menu at the top, deselect, but probably a lot quicker to get used to the keyboard shortcut on a Mac, Command D, on a PC, I believe it's Alt D. So we'll just do that, deselect. So you can also select a single row of pixels in either direction. You've got a lasso tool, which is another selection tool which enables you to draw a selection. So you get a loose shape. We've got the polygonal lasso tool, which allows you to draw a straight-sided shape, and when you join up with the first point, you'll get that shape as a selection. Let's deselect that. And lastly, the magnetic lasso tool is quite useful because it enables you to draw around an existing shape. So you can see it's following the edge. It doesn't follow it perfectly because it depends on how much contrast there is on that edge. So it depends on what sort of image you're working with. Another selection tool is the Magic Wand tool, and that it selects by pixels. So if you've got an area that is all the same pixels or similar pixels, it will select that. Now you might ask, well, why has it selected all those different greys? Because when you have the Magic Wand tool selected, you've got a tolerance value in here. If I set that to quite a low amount, say 5, you'll see we're getting a much more limited range selected. So all those similar greys, and we can even set it to 0 or 0. Let's put it, or 0 or 1 I should say. Let's put it on 1, and now we're just getting much more limited areas. So that's another way of selecting areas. We've got the quick selection tool, which is similar, except that we drag it around an area. And you'll see it follows that general sort of shape. Just the last tool under the Magic Wand area is the object selection tool. So if we choose a fairly well defined object like this black square, draw a marquee around it, you will see that the selection jumps to that shape. Then we've got the crop tool. So when we've got that selected, we've immediately got some corners or side anchor points to drag around. When we've got an area that we want to perhaps isolate, if we go into that title there, text, double click, and it crops to that area. Just remaining on the crop tool for a minute, if you put your cursor just outside one of the corners, you'll see you've got this double-headed arrow. That, if I click and hold the mouse down there, that gives you a grid. And also, if I move, you can see that the image is rotating. And so you can then crop, and you've rotated the image. Also, under the crop, we've got a perspective crop. I'm not sure how often you might need this, but we can drag that over the area, and we obviously get some distortion there at the same time, which adds some sort of perspective to the crop. We've also got a couple of slicing tools, more used for website design. Then we have the frame tool, and this, if we draw a frame on it, we can then drop another image into that, that area. Now, I'm not going to spend a lot of time going into every single tool. The eyedropper tool, that's a way of sampling a colour. So if we click on the green, you see it puts it down here in your foreground colours. We've got foreground and background colours indicated at the bottom of the tool panel. So sampling colours, we've got various other tools there linked to the eyedropper tool. We also got some means of measuring areas. Some of these I'm going to let you explore yourself. We've got a number of tools for just healing or editing blemishes perhaps, or marks in our images. So let's just deal with one of them, the spot healing brush. For instance, I could just paint over that area, and it basically samples pixels around the area that I've clicked and fills those pixels back into where I'm dragging the brush. But that's for you to explore some of those other options for doing that kind of retouching. We've got a healing brush, patch tool, content aware move tool, and red eye tool. We have brushes and pencils, and color replacement tool and mixer brush tool. A brush performs as you would expect, I guess, but with a number of these tools, we're able to set the size. So if we look up in the options strip, we get the brush tool icon indicates that's what we're on, but we can also, we might have some presets defined for those. There's none at the moment, but we can change the size of the brush just by dragging this slider, and you can see it changes the size. But we can also change the hardness. So when it's on maximum hardness, we get a hard edged brush. So we're painting with this green color, so we get that. But if we changed the hardness and took it right down to 0, we would get a soft edge. Let's just undo those two. We also can control how that mark interacts with the colors that are already on a page. So we've got some blending modes here. Now blending modes are a good example of something that appears in a number of different places. When they're in the options strip, they just apply to the tool that you're using. So you might notice that if we choose multiply and we go across the black line, we can see the black line through the colour that we are painting. So if I go across these greys, we're seeing the greys through the green. So the colour I'm painting is interacting or blending with the colour underneath. If we take that off and set it to none, or normal I should say, you'll see that the green covers up what is underneath it completely. And each one of those blending modes, too many to demonstrate individually, but each one will have a slightly different effect and interact with the colour underneath in a slightly different way. So if you're looking for a particular effect, try them all out and see which one gives you what you're looking for. So we've then got the rubber stamp, or the clone stamp tool. Looks like a rubber stamp. And this is a tool I use quite a lot because it's great for retouching. So perhaps we might want to take one of these pieces of text out. Let's first of all change the actual brush and get rid of the hardness so it's a soft edge. That will just help the edges to blend in more. The way we use this is in conjunction with the Option or Alt key. Option if you're on a Mac, Alt if you're on a PC. So first of all, we want to sample an area. So let's say we're going to take out 30%. So we need to sample the background color, which is this gray. So hold the Option key down and click once with your mouse, and then release the Option key. So it's now sampled that area, and I can then just drag, and you see what's happening. You get another cursor appear, and that's where you're sampling from. And then you're painting over where your actual cursor is. So it might be worth just pointing out that if you're on an area where there's a very perhaps a change of tone or color, as there is here with the 20%, you might want to actually click on that actual line. So Option and then click. So I've sampled there, and I can paint in. You see, if I go there, you can just about see the edge of that color. So if I line it up, I can then take that out. Very useful for retouching images. Let's undo those. And we've got a pattern stamp tool as well, which are less useful. History brush. If we want to go back through some of the edits that we've undertaken, eraser tool works alongside setting the size and the hardness. So if you wanted to erase something with a soft edge, you can do that. Just a point here, you'll see the checkered effect that's appeared. What does that mean? Well, that is how Photoshop displays transparency. So basically there's nothing there. It couldn't be white because white is a color. So if you see that checkerboard, it's something that is completely transparent. A bit more about that when we get onto layers. So eraser, pretty clear. We've got gradients. When we choose the gradient tool, up in the option strip we get an option for choosing different gradients. We've got some presets which we can skip through, choose a different one. When we've chosen it, drag the cursor down and it will basically put that gradient in. Paint bucket tool, we've all played with that kind of thing and filled up areas with paint. Not needing to demonstrate that. The smudge tool does what it says. Basically it will smudge or blur So it's really a smudge. Also, we can sharpen areas. So if we had a blurred area, something that needs to just be sharpened up, we can sharpen up, and everything's sharp here, so I don't really need to use it. But we could sharpen up a specific area with a sharpen tool, or blur a specific area. Then we've got dodge and burn, very useful. So this is for let's demonstrate it on this area. So we're on the dodge tool, and you'll see it's just lightened that area of the image. So let's undo that again. So it's adding an isolated area that is lightened, and we can adjust the way that tool performs by some of these options here. We can adjust how much that's lightened by reducing the exposure, that kind of thing. And the opposite of that is the burn tool. Let's just increase the size of the brush a bit, which will actually darken the area. Now that's subtle, but you can see it is actually darkening. It's because the exposure is a bit low. We can put it up to maximum, and it's beginning to darken that image. Just while we're on these three tools, the sponge tool, if we just hold the mouse over it, you'll see you get a description of what it does, and it pretty much explains it. Changes the color saturation of areas in an image. So just to demonstrate that, you can see that that red is getting very much brighter. Pen tool, we have got an exercise in one of the assignments that will get you used to using the pen tool. Very useful. You may have played with other programs that use a pen tool, like Adobe Illustrator. It uses it in exactly the same way. So you can draw a straight lined path like that, or if you drag it, click and drag, you get a curve. And you'll see those anchor points appear. If we just skip down one to the arrowed path selection tool and the direct selection tool, particularly the direct selection, that's the one that's got the white arrowhead. We click away from the path and then click it. You see we get these handles, which we can edit the curve that we've created. So if it's not quite right when we drew it, we can edit it. And there's a few other things that we can do with this as well. I'm not going to spend too much time on the pen tool, but if we use it with the Alt or the Option key on these handles, they work independently from the other one, and we can then begin to get an angle rather than a curve. So there are two selection tools in that type of selection tool. The direct selection tool will select and show individual anchor points that we can edit. Let's just get rid of that path, and then the path selection tool will select the whole path. So if you want to edit something, go for the direct selection tool. We've got a shape builder, various shapes there, so that should be clear what they do. Here we've got the hand tool, and to demonstrate this, I'm just going to enlarge this image so that you can see how it works. To enlarge this image, I'm going to use my Command on the Mac, Command and plus and minus. So on a PC, I expect it will be Alt plus and minus. So Command plus takes the image up in size. Command minus takes it down. So just going to increase it so it's that sort of size, because then when we're on the hand tool, we can move things around like that. But one other point to make is that there's a keyboard option for this. Whatever tool you're on, let's go up to the rectangular marquee tool, and and we've got an image that's bigger than the window that we've got open. If we hold our space bar down, we get the hand tool, and we can move things around. And we can rotate the view as well. We may want to zoom in on something specific, so we've got a magnifying glass. We'll do that. We can edit the way this toolbar looks as well by removing tools if we want to. It's worth pointing out that one other thing as we look at this tool panel, we can go to the window and we have a workspace that we can choose, and it will set up our window with the tools and the palettes that we need for some of these specific uses. We might want to choose photography, but if you're more into the graphic side of things, choosing that will make sure that there are things like type tools available. And we can also save a workspace. If we've got specific tools that we want and specific palettes open, we can do that and save a workspace by creating a new workspace. So I'm going to leave it on Essentials rather. Coming down here, we've got an indication of what the foreground and background color would be, and if we click on the other, we can change the background color. So background color, click on there, you get an option for changing colors with all the various numbers that we might want to put in for CMYK or RGB. If we choose a different one, we go OK. You see we've changed our background color. Let's go and set that back to white, I think. And well, let's leave it on a color for the moment, because we can use the keyboard shortcut of X to toggle between the two. So you see that we've got a green as a foreground color. If I use X, that will put that green into the background color. And also on the keyboard, the D key changes it to black and white. So that's all I'm going to say about the tool side of things. Over here on the palettes, we've got a lot of palettes here and a lot of other palettes in our window. Information with various numbers depending on where we are on our image. A history palette enabling us to skip back through some of the commands we've done. We've got ways of controlling brushes. If we're into text, or we're adding text and graphics, well, we're not going to be doing that in this course, but we can play with that sort of thing. And down here we've got character as well, so we've got typefaces and ways of manipulating those. So tool presets we won't be touching for the moment. Properties we will get onto, but we'll leave that to some of the assignments when we're actually using those tools. And I'm going to leave adjustments as well, libraries. Layers is really the big area we want to look at. So let's just have a look at this layer palette. One thing to say is we can drag, if we feel we want this resized and moved away and moved somewhere else on our window, we can move it around, and we can also re-dock it when we see that blue line appear. It redocks it into the palettes, and we can open and close it by clicking. Let me explain what we're looking at here. We have just one single layer in this file, and often when we open an image, let's just do that. I'm going to go to Command Open or Command O on the keyboard, And let's open another image. Let's find something to open. I have got this banana that I grew in my garden. It's a very small banana, as you can see. I'm based in Wanganui, so you can grow bananas in Wanganui. So I've opened this image, and if we look at layers, you see it calls the layer background, and it's got a little locked symbol there. You notice that at the top I've now got two images open. I've got the calibration image, which is a PNG file, .png, and this image I've just opened up. So you get the tabs, and we can have multiple images open at the same time. So if I go to my banana, you'll see a difference between the two images. If I skip back to calibration, that's called layer 1, and it's not locked, whereas this is called background, and it is locked. Now I can unlock it, but you'll notice if I go to the eraser tool and just try and erase something, let's make the brush bigger, it erases the image, but it turns it white. That's because it's locked and there's nothing that can appear underneath it. You can't put any other layer underneath the background layer. However, in this image, it's not locked, so I could have a second layer underneath this, which is why when I try and erase things, it shows transparency rather than white. So just to point that out, we'll go back to this image. I'm going to undo that erasing part, and if we want to make this not a background image, we can click on the lock symbol, and now I can place a layer underneath that. We've got an eye symbol here, which means I can switch that layer on and off. I can create a new layer, and it's worth pointing out now that in addition to the menus we have at the top of the screen, we have menus in the corner of each of these palettes, and that's what this area is. If we click on here, we see we can create a new layer there. So we can create a new layer by selecting new layer from the palette menu, the menu in the corner, but we've also got an option at the bottom where we can click the icon, create a new layer. So one of two ways. If I create a new layer, we can give it a name. I'll call it new layer. And now we've got a second layer above our image. And we can move these layers around. So now it's below. Let me just demonstrate perhaps how that might work. If I choose the brush tool, and let's have a colour. So I can just increase the size of the brush. I can draw something there, but that line or that red area that I've just drawn is on that layer. So I can switch it on and off, or I could even drag it below, and you're actually not going to see it now because it's underneath. But one other thing I could do, I mentioned about the blending modes up in the options strip. They also appear here, and I can attach a blending mode to a layer. So if I went to multiply, now my banana layer is over the top of the red mark, but it becomes transparent, and you can see through the image to whatever is underneath. And there'll be some different ways or different blending modes we can choose that will have different effects, and you can scroll through those and choose one that you like. What else have we got here? We can play with the opacity of a layer. So keep in mind that when you're working on a layer, you need to have that layer selected. So if I select the layer underneath, that layer is now grey, indicating that it's selected. So going back to the top layer, if I reduce the opacity, you see we can play with that kind of thing. So that's layers, and we will be getting more into layers as the course continues. What else have we got here? Colors, which we can select or fill areas. Swatches might be useful, particularly if we want to build a specific palette. Gradients we use in conjunction with the gradient tool, but more about that later on. Let's just jump back and cover a couple of things that I missed as I went through. Quite difficult to think of everything in one go, but going back to our original image of the calibration card, let's say we want to combine two images, and we will be doing quite a bit of this kind of work on 101. So let's take the marquee tool and let's just drag it over this part of the image, and I'm going to go to Edit and Copy, which is Command C on the keyboard if you're on a Mac, or Alt C, but we'll use the menu for now. So copy, so that's copied that area. I can go to my other image that I've got open, the banana, and I can paste. So edit, and we can go paste, or Command V, Alt V, and that puts the two images together. And if we open up the layers palette, we can see that as soon as I paste the second image in, it pastes it on a separate layer. I can switch that one off, or switch the background layer off. Now you notice I can't drag that top layer below this one because this one's locked. When it's a background layer, nothing can go below it, but if I unlock it, I can switch them around. Okay, so that's how we'll be combining two images together, and there's lots more we can do with that technique in terms of creating composite images. Another thing I didn't mention was when we have the, let's think, the Magic Wand tool. So this is a way of selecting a part of an image, and its tolerance is on 1, so it's only selected 1 pixel there, but we can increase that. Let's just deselect that 1 pixel, increase that to say 50, and then we'll get a lot more. Notice that we have up in the options strip, we've got contiguous selected or ticked. That means that contiguous means that it'll select adjoining areas. So if we deselected that and turned to contiguous off, so it'll select all of the same range of pixels, whether they're adjoining or not. So that's one thing I didn't mention. When we crop an image, which is there, you'll notice we've got delete cropped pixels up here in the options strip, and it's unchecked at the moment. It's a good idea to leave it unchecked, because if we check it and we then so if we checked it and we crop in, any area that I crop out will be lost completely. But if it's unchecked, we will be able to return to those deleted pixels if we needed to. So something to be aware of. If we want to save an image from here, because it's let's just going to take it back to where we've got two separate layers. Because we have two layers, we go to File and Save As, we will want to save it as a Photoshop format, which is .psd, because you'll notice that it will save the layers as they are. We can reduce those layers or combine those layers. We go to the layers palette. You notice we've got a lot of things we can do with layers. We can duplicate layers or delete layers. Down the bottom we can merge visible layers, which means if we had a number of layers and some were switched off, it would just merge together those that are switched on. We can also flatten the image, and that, when we do that, reduces it down to one layer, and we could now save it as a JPEG rather than a PSD. And that's a process that I like to do when I save to JPEGs, is always flatten it first, because we can see then what's going on, and sometimes we get some unexpected results when we flatten images, and if we're watching what happens, we can address them and adjust things accordingly. So let's just undo that back to 2 layers. Under the image menu, we've got an image size dialog box, which tells us the physical dimensions and the resolution. So this is where we would change that if we needed to. Notice that the dimensions are linked by this little chain icon, which means that if we change one, and the other one will change in proportion. If we don't want that to happen, if we click that, it becomes unlinked. But be aware that when you do that, if that's not linked and you change one proportion, it will distort the image, it will stretch or squash the image. So it's always a good idea to have that linked. So that's image size. And there's some more details about image size in the first week's assignment, where you will need to resize an image. So you'll get some instructions on that specifically. We'll leave it there, and some of the tutorials that appear with each week will go into more detail on some of these things, and particularly when we work through a step-by-step process to answer some of the assignments. That will take you through more specific teaching on some of these tools.